So they say it's a man's world? Well, I don't see anybody's name on it. While they were out doing their thing, we slowly changed all that. We changed all that. Today, women can do anything men can do. And there's one thing we're even better at.
Say MMS was the soundtrack of the city, and we were homegrown. I mean, there's a lot of elements to that, to answer your question. You had John from Boston, Jeff and Flash from Cleveland. Jeff grew up in Lakewood. I grew up in the Parma area. We had Matt the Cat, grew up in Garfield Heights, I believe, that area, Maple Heights. Kid Leo. East Side. It was very homegrown, and I often heard, in fact, Denny would say, we want to create a radio station that we would listen to. And you have to understand the times. Top 40 was dying. And I wanted to talk about this a little bit earlier as far as how I got into radio, because I'm sure a lot of you folks remember Wixie 1260. And Wixie 1260 kind of, when they hit, which was 1965, it exploded. That was the station to listen to, and I said, God, that would be a cool thing to do someday, to be on the air on a station like Wixie. Well, AM started to die, and FM was starting to grow, and you started in 73, I believe?
73, yeah.
73. I started in February of 73. Jeff was like in maybe April of 73. There was a bunch of Leo started, I think, in January. There was a lot of people. 1973 was a huge year that started the foundation of that radio station, and it grew.
And Denny deserves the credit for hiring the initial staff.
Right, absolutely.
Well, for helping to keep the format, too.
Well, yeah. And
there was a time they wanted to change it to country, wasn't it?
Milt wanted to change it to country.
Yeah.
It was actually, this is an interesting thing. What happened was, and let's go back to Flash in a second, but while it's on my mind, in those days, the FCC carried a lot of pull. If you were changing your collars or changing your format, you had to let every other station within like a 60-mile radius know you were doing something like that. And so when Mulwright bought the station from Metro Media, their intent was to change the station to country. And there was an uproar. Even though MMS had a small audience, it had a small but loyal audience, and we were the baby boomers. We were going to take over anyway. But there was one person that approached the FCC and said, how do we keep the station on the air? And the FCC said, well, you have to get at least 3,000 signatures, and then you petition the FCC, and if there's a need for your format, and if those people say that you should stay in this format, they have to keep that format for at least 1 year. And if they can show hardship that they're not making it that format, then they can change. Well, that person that did the petition and was told he had to get 3,000 signatures, went around, and he ended up getting 6,000 and delivered to the FCC. That person's name is Dennis Kucinich. And that is the strangest thing of all. Dennis Kucinich saved MMS. And this is
Hard to believe.
And this is even before he was. He had just become a councilman, I think, at the time. This was in late 1973. It was actually November of '73 when the weather was changing and all that. And MMS used to be at 55th and Euclid. It was not the best place. Somebody had, remember, everybody had their car stolen at least once out of a parking lot. I mean, we used to call it the DMZ.
Purses, too.
But anyway, Denny and I were talking and saying, you know, we've got to come up with some kind of a logo. And we started talking about, you know, sports teams having, you know, mascots. And we ought to come up with this mascot. And, you know, we wanted to have an image that was unique, that nobody ever did before. And we just couldn't come up with anything. And I'm driving home that night. And at the time, when I first moved to Cleveland, somebody said to me, yeah, you got to live on the east side. Well, I thought they said East Cleveland. So actually, the first apartment I ever had was in the corner of Cliffview and Euclid. It was like Euclid and Green, that area. I mean, there was one time I heard somebody, you know, I thought somebody like shot these fireworks in the hall. It turned out there was a mass shooting in the apartment I was in. But my drive every day from the station was from 55th and Euclid all the way up Euclid to Euclid and Green. And, you know, in those days, it was just complete desolation. And Denny and I had this conversation. It was one of those cold days that it couldn't, you know, it was rain and snow and slush, and I'm driving home, and half the street lights are out, and it's a tough neighborhood back in those days. And Denny is playing Desolation Row by Bob Dylan. It's like, you know, the most depressing song while I'm taking the most depressing ride. And at the same time, at the time the Cleveland Press was still printing, and they had a headline, and I believe it was Diamond Shamrock. It was one of the Fortune 500 companies that moved out of Cleveland. And the headline was that this Fortune 500 company was moving, but the CEO was quoted as saying, "We don't know where we're moving to. We just want out of Cleveland." Now, the other thing is, I'm from Boston. I moved a few months earlier from Boston to Cleveland, and everybody that I'd meet, they'd say, "Oh, where are you from?" Because they'd hear the accent. And I'd say, Boston. They said, "Well, are you just visiting?" I said, "No, I just moved here." And I'd always get this, "Why did you move here?" As if here was the worst place in the world. Now, I didn't come, when I came here, the first thing I noticed was I saw that lake, and I said, God, this is a freshwater lake. I see the metro parks. I'm looking at all these things in Cleveland saying, this isn't a bad place. But yet everybody was telling me this was a terrible place to live. And on top of that, then the CEO was saying, we don't know where we're moving. We just have to get out of Cleveland. And then Denny is playing Desolation Row. It was like the most depressing drive of my life. And all of a sudden, and I also have in my mind, we were talking about we need a mascot. And it's like, well, what else would you have flying over a dying city except buzzards? And so I came into the station the next day and I said, Denny, I've got it. Why don't we have a buzzard as a logo? And Denny goes, a buzzard? And the other thing was at the time, do you remember, this was back in the 70s, there was this poster that had two buzzards, one talking to another, they're both on a branch, and one says to the other, patience my ass, I'm going to kill something. And it was like, we started talking about that poster, and we said, that is our image. Instead of all this peace and love and all that, we're going to be the station that takes over the city and take no prisoners, and that's how the buzzard came to be.
All right. Rolling Stone magazine named MMS Radio Station of the Year 7 years in a row. This was nationally 79 to 86. What made that happen? What is your point of view on what was the combination? How did we do that?
Well, even more than that, the station was making a lot of money. Yeah. And the fact that it did so, it allowed us to keep growing because Carl Hurst, the person we were just talking about, Carl funneled X amount of dollars back into MMS to keep us strong. And, that's unheard of. in the radio industry, even back then. Today, forget it. The radio industry is dead. Yeah. But back then, Carl actually was, and he was a guy that really encouraged us to be creative and to go where nobody ever went before, and that made a difference. The Rolling Stone was minor because we had a much bigger battle to fight, which is every day, every morning, it's a new battle, and you have competition, and we have to fight to get that. And here's the other thing: is our competition was very, very good. It's not that Cleveland had that we were a very good radio station in town. We had good competition. We just were the best.
Speaking of competition, what we had, MMS was a mom and pop operation. Malta owned it. There were probably about a dozen broadcast owners in town. You don't have that today. You've got a couple of, got the Clear Channels, iHeartMedia, you've got CBS, you got Radio 1 in Salem. You basically got 4 operators in Cleveland today. The competition element, for instance, iHeartMedia has 7 radio stations, I believe. So the competition could be within the room, but that's not like it used to be.
Let me point something out here about competition. Now, first of all, MMS had a great air sound, and there was good air competition. It sounded good on the air. But quite honestly, a lot of the other stations just didn't have the brains behind them or the money behind them. Because I was working on another radio station, and WGCL was the station downstairs. They sounded great. We wanted nothing to do with them.
Yeah, but they were the baboons.
They were no, they were. That's exactly why. Because we're not going to be a part of that.
Well,
we're not going to be targeted.
It's like John said. It was a take no prisoners attitude. We don't care what format you were, whether you were country, whether you were talk, sports, whatever the case may be. We were out to be number one. It was the Buzzard Nuclear Army.
Yeah.
We're out to destroy you. And I can recall back in you left in 86, it was right, 86, 87. That's when the station actually peaked. Because we had on that book, it was the Arbitron book. It was the fall of 86. In the morning, we had a 20.4 share, which was unbelievable. Lanigan was in second place with a 6. That is dominance in radio. No doubt.
Oh, yeah.
No doubt.
Well, the other thing, too, we're going back to the Buzzard. The Buzzard was the visual component. And it wasn't just call letters, because somebody told, John, you might have been the one that said, they wanted, or Flash, you might have said it one time, they wanted you to see the call letters several times before you got to the city on your ride in. You just didn't hear it. You would see it places. And it was such a visual component. I remember watching, it was everywhere. I saw it on Saturday Night Live. The guy, with Triumph or something, the guy was wearing a shirt. I saw Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys jogging in one of them. And then refugees in Haiti, somebody was wearing them.
Yeah.
That's not
Well, we had to get that Haiti market, That was really important. John, I think you said this a couple of times as far as MMS, promotion and programming. It was almost like a 50% each. So you had to have a good product, which we did. But you had to promote that product. And we had the T-shirts. We had the belt buckles. We had the halter tops. We had the caps.
Yeah, Murray with the halter tops. If you need one, you can have one.
Yeah.
But the other, probably more important than anything else, we had a great team.
Yeah.
It was a solid team. Everybody worked together. It was just a lot of talent in that building.
The World Series of Rock concert.
Oh, yeah.
First of all, how did those come together? I mean, whose idea was it, and how did those come together?
That was a conversation between Jules Belkin and Art Modell. Art Modell renewed his lease at the stadium, running the stadium, and he wanted to find additional ways to make income.
He was trying to get a winning team at the stadium, okay?
Yeah. But he knew he didn't have a chance, so he ended up doing something else because he was his own worst enemy. But we did a concert with Leon Russell in it was August of 1973. Yep. And that was the test, that if that concert worked out, we would then do some kind of a festival, like an all-day affair.
So Leon Russell at Municipal Stadium?
At Municipal Stadium, August of 1973. And then we had a meeting with in Jules's office. It was early '74, and he said, "We're going to do a concert." And he explained what he wanted to do, and it was the Beach Boys, Joe Walsh, I think Leonard Skinner, and all that. It was the first one. And we wanted to keep a team. And the Cleveland Press was a sponsor along with MMS. But we couldn't come up with a name with it for the concert. And I just remember jokingly saying, well, what will Cleveland never have that's related? And it was like, we'll never have a World Series. Because do you remember how bad, the Indians are always in the last place, And that's how it came out. The World Series of Rock came to be so we could have a World Series in Cleveland.
Yeah.
And we didn't think it was going to stick, but it did.
It was an event more than a concert, I think.
Yeah.
You know.
And, at the time, that was another thing, is the Beach Boys weren't cool, except in Cleveland. The Beach Boys still carried some cachet. So you could have the Beach Boys and Joe Walsh and all that. And I think the first show did, I think it did 55,000.
Well, you remember you couldn't bring bottles in, so they used to have these wine sacks. And then when the wine was done, if you didn't, it would stick together. You had to go buy a new wine sack. But the thing that I remember was there was actually an event that happened in one of those World Series of Rock with Aerosmith. And John,
I was there for that, yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, Aerosmith broke up after their World Series of Rock. I forget whose wife threw a glass of milk at Joe Perry's wife, and the band broke up on the spot backstage. But they weren't getting along. That's when there was all the drugs and everything, and Steven Tyler didn't know where he was, and neither did Joe Perry and all that.
Well, that was it. Joe Perry came back for some concerts. I remember I think it was a Monday night show.
He came back and did an Agora show.
Yeah,
Joe Perry
he was
project.
dysfunctional.
Yeah.
He grabbed onto the mic and slipped.
Yeah. Well, those guys did more drugs than,
Than you. Okay.
Hey. Tape.
Now, okay.
But I remember in the World Series, the best, I think you were there for this. We would sit in the press box, and we could look over the entire World Series Rock. Remember when Murray Saul went down to the crowd?
Yeah.
And we watched the crowd. It was like that scene in the Ten Commandments where the Red Sea, Moses parted the Red Sea.
Yeah.
You could see when Murray was walking, because all these people were standing, and he walked all the way to the front of the stage, all the way back, and you'd see all these people just standing and allowing Murray to pass. And Murray comes back into the press box, and he literally it was like Halloween. He had a baggies filled with pot.
Tell one of your secret stories. I want you to tell something that you can't believe you survived. Okay, that something occurred, something crazy at a concert, something, at the station, and you just can't believe, oh my God, I just survived that. And tie it back to it, MMS. You look like you have a story, Flash.
Well, I can't say that I think I'd survive it, but it's a cool story. It's a cool. Could we go with that? Yeah. It's a cool story. Yeah. 1982, and the Who does a concert in Cincinnati. 11 people trampled to death, and it's a national story. They go to, I believe it was outside of Boston, for another show, and then they come to Cleveland. They're going to do 2 nights in Cleveland. And John calls me up, and he says, and they were flying in on like a Saturday night. And he says, Flash, you got to go to the airport. There's a certain location at the airport they're going to land, probably somewhere between 1 and 3 in the morning. I'm like, wait a minute. That time? Yeah, you got to go. So I grab my tape recorder, I go there, and I'm waiting. They come into the airport. And all of a sudden, they're coming through, and I see Daltrey. I see the band coming out. Daltrey was real nice, and it was like the Who has landed in Cleveland. I got the tape recorder going, and this is cool. And this is the big story. It's a national story. Townsend comes by, and they're all burned out. They just played a concert. He looks at me, looks up. He says, I'll talk to you after the show tomorrow night. I said, okay, fine. He kind of blew me off. He did blow me off. And then that was like early Sunday morning. Monday night, they played Monday night and Tuesday night at the old Coliseum, Richfield Coliseum. Boy, if those walls can talk. So they play a great show. At the end of the show, I get backstage. And Rolling Stone is back there. Time Magazine is back there. All the media is back there. Kid Leo's back there. They're all yapping and having a good time and talking. And one thing goes after another. I'm looking at my watch. I got to get up and do the news the following morning. I'm up at usually 4 in the morning. It's already like 12:30, 1 o'clock. I said, I don't know if I'm going to get this interview. So I'm getting ready to leave. I'm getting up, getting ready to leave. Townsend is about 50 feet from me. He looks up. He goes, "You." Me? Yeah, you. You're the one that waited for me at the airport. I was like, what? He remembered that. So he said, "You got a tape recorder?" We sat down. We just started talking. In that interview, you may recall, the station always played IDs. I'm Bruce Springsteen. When I'm in Cleveland, I listen to MMS, home of the Buzzard. It was that night we talked about rock and roll. We talked about Cincinnati. We talked about what's going to happen next. And he came with that ID. Rock and roll will always, 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 always overcome eventually.